My name is Larry Winters, 35 years old, standing on the frost-covered porch of my childhood home clutching a bag of carefully wrapped presents. 2 years since my last disastrous family Christmas. I felt hopeful things would be different today. I brought expensive gifts for everyone and spent hours making Grandma Winter's special cranberry apple casserole. The doorbell echoed inside. When Aunt Margaret opened the door, her face twisted with disgust. "We do not want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday." Beyond her shoulder, I glimpsed my entire family around the dining table, laughing together. I just nodded, turned around, and whispered, "Got it." 10 minutes later, my dad burst through the door. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and if you have ever felt the sting of family rejection during the holidays, hit that subscribe button now. This story might help you more than you know. I grew up in a suburb just outside Boston, in a red brick colonial with perfect white shutters and a manicured lawn that my father James maintained with religious devotion every Saturday morning. To neighbors and friends, we were the picture-perfect American family. Dad was a respected cardiologist at Massachusetts General. Mom ran the local garden club, and my sister Amanda was the high school valedictorian who went on to Yale. Then there was me. From the beginning, Dad and I shared a special connection. When I was 5, he would let me use his real stethoscope to listen to his heartbeat, explaining how the human heart worked with patient detail that most kids my age would have found boring. But I was fascinated, not by medicine exactly, but by how my father's eyes lit up when he talked about it. "The heart never lies, Larry," he would say. "You listen carefully enough. It tells you everything you need to know." My mother Catherine was different. She moved through our house like a curator, arranging people and objects to maintain appearances rather than connections. Her smile appeared for neighbors, church members, and most often, for my sister Amanda. Mom never said it outright, but her actions spoke loudly enough. Amanda was her child. I belonged to my father. And then there was Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister. She lived 3 streets over, in an identical colonial, with her husband Frank and their twin sons. From my earliest memories, Aunt Margaret watched me with suspicious eyes, as if waiting for me to break something valuable. "He is so much like James," she would mutter to my mother when they thought I could not hear. The way she said my father's name carried decades of unspoken resentment. Christmas was always the centerpiece of our family calendar. Mom transformed our home into a holiday showpiece that could have graced the cover of Better Homes and Gardens. The 12-foot tree in the living room, the elaborate village display across the mantel, the color-coordinated ornaments that changed theme every other year. Christmas Eve would bring extended family, and Christmas Day was for just the 4 of us, opening presents in matching pajamas while classical Christmas music played softly in the background. Those were the good years, before everything changed. My freshman year of high school, something inside me shifted. The anxiety that had always hummed quietly beneath my skin grew louder. I started having panic attacks before tests. My grades slipped from straight A's to B's and then C's. The family doctor prescribed medication, which helped dull the edges, but also made me feel like I was living underwater. Dad tried to understand. "The mind is connected to the body, son. We will figure this out together." Mom was less sympathetic. "The Caldwell family does not struggle with mental issues," she said one night, after a particularly difficult parent-teacher conference. "This must be from your father's side." By senior year, the unspoken expectation was that I would follow my father into medicine. The applications to pre-med programs sat on my desk, filled out by my mother, needing only my signature. But something did not feel right. During a career counseling session, my art teacher, Mrs. Sanchez, pulled out a portfolio of sketches I had been working on. "Larry, Have you considered design school? You have a remarkable eye for spatial relationships. That conversation changed everything. When I announced at dinner that I wanted to study architectural design instead of medicine, my father paused with his fork midair. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Relief? I could not tell. If that is what you want, son, he said finally. My mother did not speak to me for 3 days. The following decade saw a gradual drifting. I moved to Chicago for design school, then to New York for a job with a small but innovative firm. Holidays became shorter, phone calls less frequent. Mom and Amanda developed a shared language of achievements and social connections that left little room for my stories of design projects and urban explorations. Dad tried to bridge the gap, asking thoughtful questions about my work. But our conversations inevitably cycled back to his patients, or Amanda's latest accomplishment. Christmas became an exercise in endurance. 3 days of carefully navigated conversations, of swallowed responses to passive-aggressive comments, of watching my mother beam at Amanda's lawyer husband while struggling to remember what city I lived in. Then came the Christmas that broke everything 2 years ago. Amanda announced her pregnancy at dinner, and, in the excited aftermath, Aunt Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. Well, I suppose someone in this family had to actually contribute something worthwhile, she said, wine glass tilting dangerously in her hand. What is that supposed to mean? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. Amanda is providing the next generation. What exactly are you giving this family besides disappointment? Something in me snapped. 28 years of holding my tongue, of trying to fit myself into the narrow space they allowed me, came pouring out. Maybe I would be more involved in this family if anyone besides Dad actually wanted me here, I said, loud enough that the dining room conversation stopped. Maybe I am tired of being the family disappointment, when all I did was choose my own path. The argument escalated, pulling in my mother, then Amanda, then finally my father, who tried desperately to calm everyone down. Words were said that could not be taken back. I left that night instead of staying the planned 3 days, driving back to New York in a blizzard, tears freezing on my face. For 2 years, contact had been minimal. Birthday cards from Dad, impersonal holiday greetings from Mom. Nothing from Amanda or Aunt Margaret. But something had changed in me during those 2 years. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me understand the dysfunctional patterns in my family, the roles we had all been assigned and continued to play. I learned that my worth was not determined by their approval. I built a life filled with meaningful work and genuine friendships. And yet, family is family. When my father called in November, voice tentative, asking if I would consider coming home for Christmas this year, I surprised myself by saying yes. Your mother and I miss you, he said, though I wondered if the plural was aspirational rather than factual. Even Amanda has been asking about you. I spent weeks preparing. I researched thoughtful gifts for everyone, including Aunt Margaret, though my therapist suggested I manage my expectations about her response. I took a vacation day to make my grandmother's cranberry apple casserole from scratch, a dish that had always brought my father joy. I rehearsed calm responses to potential provocations, planning exits and breathers if things got tense. The 5-hour drive from New York to Boston on Christmas morning felt full of possibility. Holiday music played on the radio. The roads were surprisingly clear, and I allowed myself to imagine reconciliation. Perhaps 2 years of distance had given everyone perspective. Perhaps we could start rebuilding something healthier, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. Perhaps Christmas could feel like coming home again. I was wrong. The snow started falling just as I turned onto my parents' street. Perfect timing, I thought. imagining the picturesque scene of reuniting with my family as soft flakes drifted down around us. Maybe it was an omen of good things to come. I had left New York before dawn, driving carefully through Connecticut and Massachusetts, stopping only for coffee and gas. The familiar landmarks of my hometown brought a mixture of nostalgia and anxiety as I navigated toward the house where I grew up. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed more cars than expected. The black Audi belonged to my sister Amanda and her husband Ryan. The silver Lexus SUV was Aunt Margaret and Uncle Frank's. There were at least 3 other vehicles I did not recognize. Apparently, this was not going to be the small, intimate family gathering I had imagined. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering myself. The presents were neatly stacked in a bag on the passenger seat, wrapped in coordinating paper with handwritten tags. The casserole dish was still warm, wrapped in a towel in a basket on the floor. I had dressed carefully that morning, in a cable-knit sweater and dark jeans that my most fashion-conscious friend had assured me looked holiday-appropriate but not trying too hard. I could do this. I was not the same person who had stormed out 2 years ago. I had done the work, processed the anger, set appropriate boundaries. I was here to rebuild bridges, not to expect immediate acceptance. The walk from my car to the front door felt longer than it should have. I balanced the gift bag in one hand, the food basket in the other. From inside, I could hear laughter and the faint strains of White Christmas on the stereo system. Mom always played Bing Crosby. On Christmas Day, standing on the porch, I noticed the same wreath that had hung there throughout my childhood. Slightly more worn now, but decorated with the same red velvet ribbon. I could not ring the doorbell with my hands full, so I knocked with my elbow, then took a deep breath and arranged my face into what I hoped was a warm, confident smile. When the door swung open, I had a split second to register that it was Aunt Margaret before seeing her expression transform. First surprise, then recognition, then unmistakable disgust. She wore a green velvet dress with a gold pin shaped like a Christmas tree, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. "We do not want you here," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive Boston Brahmin coldness that could freeze fire. "Go ruin someone else's holiday." For a moment, I thought she was making a particularly cruel joke. But there was no hint of humor in her eyes, only contempt. I shifted slightly, looking past her into the house where I had grown up. In the dining room, clearly visible from the entryway, sat my entire family around the large table that only came out for special occasions. Dad at the head of the table, Mom beside him, Amanda and Ryan opposite. Uncle Frank, cousins, even my mother's elderly aunt from Providence. They were laughing, passing platters of food, wearing paper crowns from Christmas crackers. No empty seat. No place set for me. They had not been expecting me at all. My father had invited me. Had he not? Or had I misunderstood our conversation? Had he merely been asking if I planned to come, not actually extending an invitation? The confusion must have shown on my face, because Aunt Margaret's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. "James mentioned you might show up." I told Catherine, "It would be better to be direct than to have you embarrass yourself by coming all this way for nothing." The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like being thrown into ice water. 2 years of therapy, of carefully rebuilding my self-worth, evaporated in an instant. I was 8 years old again, watching the other kids get picked for kickball while I stood alone. I could see my father from where I stood, laughing at something Ryan was saying. He had not noticed me at the door. No one had except Aunt Margaret. They were having Christmas without me, and by all appearances, enjoying themselves thoroughly. You always did have a talent for making everything about you, Aunt Margaret continued, her voice dropping to ensure only I could hear. Even as a child, constant attention-seeking. Your poor father, always having to make excuses for you. And after that disgraceful scene you caused last time, did you really think everyone would welcome you with open arms? I stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of the gifts in my arms, the warmth of the casserole against my chest. I had driven 5 hours for this moment, had spent weeks planning and preparing, and now Aunt Margaret stood in the doorway of my childhood home, telling me in no uncertain terms that I was not welcome. I could have pushed past her, could have created a scene that would have forced my family to acknowledge me, could have thrown the carefully made casserole onto the pristine snow of the front lawn. So many possible reactions raced through my mind. Instead, I nodded once. Got it, I said quietly, then turned and walked back to my car. With as much dignity as I could muster, I placed the gifts carefully in the trunk, then set the casserole dish on the passenger seat, securing it with the seatbelt. Absurd, really, to be concerned about spilling food at a moment like this. But the small, practical action gave me something to focus on besides the burning behind my eyes and the tightness in my throat. Sitting in the driver's seat, I looked back at the house. Through the large front window, I could see the massive Christmas tree, dripping with ornaments, the pile of opened presents beneath it, the perfect holiday tableau. From here, I could still hear faint laughter. I started the engine, but did not immediately drive away. Where would I go? Back to New York? Find a hotel? It was Christmas Day. What would even be open? For a few minutes, I simply sat there, watching the snow accumulate on the windshield, feeling numb. I had promised myself I would not let them hurt me again. Yet here I was, devastated by a rejection I should have anticipated. Part of me wanted to storm in there and confront them all, demand to know why my own father would set me up for this humiliation. But what would that accomplish? More drama, more hurt, more ammunition for Aunt Margaret's narrative about me being unstable and attention-seeking. No, I would not give them that satisfaction. With a deep breath, I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I had no destination in mind, only the need to put distance between myself and that house filled with people who did not want me there. As I turned the corner at the end of the street, I glanced in the rearview mirror. No one had come after me. No one had even noticed I was gone. The Holiday Inn off Interstate 95 was the third place I tried. The first 2 hotels had been closed completely, their darkened lobbies visible through locked glass doors. Even this place was operating with minimal staff, a single bored-looking young man at the front desk wearing a Santa hat that had seen better days. "Room for one?" he asked, barely looking up from his phone. "Yes, just for tonight." He slid a key card across the counter. "Room 215. Elevators around the corner. Vending machines on each floor. But nothing else is open. Merry Christmas." The room was exactly what you would expect. Beige walls, generic landscape art, a queen bed with a floral-patterned comforter that had gone out of style during the Clinton administration. But it was clean and warm, and right now that was all I needed. I set the casserole dish on the small round table by the window and looked out at the parking lot. Nearly empty, except for a few cars belonging to other holiday strays like myself. The snow was falling harder now, muffling the occasional sound of traffic from the nearby highway. On TV, "It's a Wonderful Life" was playing. I turned the volume low, just for some background noise to push back against the silence. The irony was not lost on me. George Bailey being shown how much his family and community needed him, while I sat alone in a hotel room because my family had made it abundantly clear they did not need me at all. I opened the casserole container, and the smell of cinnamon, cranberries, and baked apples filled the room. My grandmother had made this dish every Christmas throughout my childhood. After she passed when I was 15, no one continued the tradition. This year, I had tracked down her recipe through a distant cousin, spent hours getting the proportions just right. It was meant to be my peace offering, a connection to happier times. Now, I was going to eat it alone, with a plastic fork from the vending machine down the hall. My phone lit up on the bed. A text from my friend Diego. "How's family Christmas going? Surviving?" Then another from my roommate Taylor. "Miss you, dude. Hope the family drama is minimal this year." And one from my colleague Jasmine. "Thinking of you braving the lion's den. Call if you need an extraction plan." My friends had been supportive, but concerned when I told them about my decision to attend family Christmas after 2 years of no contact. They knew some of the history, though not all of it. How could I tell them what had just happened? That I had been turned away at the door like an unwelcome solicitor? The humiliation was too fresh, too raw. I turned the phone face down without responding. The casserole tasted exactly as I remembered. Sweet and tart and comforting. I ate slowly, methodically, trying to focus on the food rather than the circumstances. Through the window, I watched the snow transform the drab parking lot into something almost beautiful. There was a metaphor there, probably, about finding beauty in desolate places. But I was too tired to fully form the thought. After eating, I took out the journal my therapist had suggested I keep. Writing had become a way to process emotions I had spent most of my life suppressing. Looking at the blank page, I found myself analyzing what had just happened with unexpected clarity. Aunt Margaret had always disliked me. That much was obvious. But why? What had I ever done to her, even as a child, to warrant such disdain? And more importantly, why had my family allowed her to be the gatekeeper today? Where was my father, who had specifically invited me? As I wrote, patterns began to emerge that I had never fully recognized before. Aunt Margaret's antagonism toward me had always been most pronounced when my father was nearby. Her comments were often designed to drive a wedge between us, or to position her own sons as superior alternatives. There was something almost competitive about her behavior, and my father, for all his private warmth toward me, had never openly defended me against her barbs. He would change the subject, or suggest we move to another room, but never directly challenged her right to treat me with contempt. Why? Then there was my mother, who had always seemed to take her cues from Margaret rather than forming her own relationship with me, and Amanda, who had learned early that siding with Mom and Aunt Margaret was the path of least resistance. I had spent years in therapy focusing on my responses to my family's behavior, learning to set boundaries and manage my expectations. But I had never really questioned why they behaved as they did in the first place. What family dynamics had been set in motion long before I was born? What role had I been assigned in a play whose script was written decades ago? I was halfway through composing an email to my therapist, trying to capture these insights before they slipped away, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something compelled me to swipe the screen. "Hello? Larry? Thank God. Where are you?" The voice on the phone was instantly familiar, though I had not heard it in at least 3 years. Uncle Robert? Robert Winters was my father's younger brother by 5 years. He was the family outlier, the one who had moved to Seattle in his 20s and built a successful life 3,000 miles away from the rest of the Winters clan. He visited Boston rarely, usually for weddings and funerals, and maintained what my mother called a disappointing lack of family commitment. What she meant was that Uncle Robert had escaped the gravitational pull of family obligation and seemed happier for it. Yes, it is me. Larry, where are you? I have been driving around looking for you. I am at the Holiday Inn off 95. How did you get my number? Your father gave it to me. Listen, I arrived late to Christmas dinner and walked into World War III. Margaret told everyone what she did, and your dad absolutely lost it. I have never seen him so angry. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? I mean, he flipped the gravy boat across the table, told Margaret she had no right to send you away, and is now driving around town looking for you too. I got your number from him when we split up to cover more ground. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. I do not understand. Dad invited me to Christmas. At least, I thought he did. But when I got there, no one was expecting me. There was not even a place set for me at the table. Uncle Robert sighed. It is complicated, and not really something to explain over the phone. Can I come to you? Are you okay with that? 20 minutes later, I was waiting in the hotel lobby when Uncle Robert pushed through the revolving door, bringing a swirl of snowflakes with him. He looked older than I remembered, his dark hair now salt and pepper, lines around his eyes that had not been there at our last meeting, but his smile was the same, warm and genuine. Look at you, he said, pulling me into a tight hug. All grown up and successful. I have been following your work online. That mixed-use development in Brooklyn was brilliant. I was startled. You follow my work? Of course I do. You are my nephew, and talented as hell. Now, is there somewhere we can talk? Preferably with coffee? The hotel restaurant was closed, but the front desk clerk directed us to a small meeting room off the lobby where a coffee station had been set up for guests. We sat at a small table, steam rising from paper cups of mediocre coffee. So what happened today? I asked. Uncle Robert ran a hand through his snow-damp hair. The short version? Your father told everyone you were coming for Christmas dinner. Margaret and your mother decided that was a bad idea given what they called the unresolved tension from last time. They basically formed an alliance to protect the holiday from potential drama. By creating drama, I said flatly. Exactly. Your father thought he had made it clear you were expected. But when he went to pick up your grandmother's nursing home for her annual visit, Catherine and Margaret took control of the narrative. By the time I arrived, about 15 minutes after you left, your dad had just returned with Grandma, found out what happened, and exploded. I tried to process this information. So Dad did invite me? For real? Very much for real. He has been talking about it for weeks, how this was going to be the Christmas that fixed everything. Uncle Robert took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. This is terrible. Look, there is something you should know. Something that might help you understand the bizarre dynamics in this family. For the next hour, Uncle Robert filled in gaps in my understanding of my family that I had never known existed. How my father and Aunt Margaret had dated briefly in college before he met my mother. How Margaret had never really gotten over it, even after marrying my mother's brother Frank. How she had always resented the close relationship between my father and me. Margaret wanted your father. Then she wanted his attention. Then she wanted to control his relationship with his son. Uncle Robert explained. And your mother, well, Catherine has always been insecure about James's affection. She sensed that special bond between you two, and instead of nurturing it, she felt threatened by it. So I became the battleground, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Precisely. And being the peacekeeper he is, James tried to maintain relationships with everyone, which meant never fully standing up for you against Margaret's subtle warfare. He thought he was keeping the peace, but he was really just enabling her. And you know all this because I got out, Distance gives perspective. Plus, I had my own clash with Margaret years ago that led to my strategic relocation to the opposite coast. He smiled wryly. Best decision I ever made, though I have always felt guilty about leaving James to deal with the situation alone. My phone rang again. My father. I showed the screen to Uncle Robert. You should answer it, he said. He is worried sick about you. I hesitated, then pressed accept. Dad? Larry, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? His voice sounded ragged, as if he had been shouting. I am fine. I am with Uncle Robert at the Holiday Inn. Stay there. I am coming to you. 20 minutes later, my father burst into the hotel lobby like a man pursued by demons. At 64, he was still imposing, 6'2", with the broad shoulders of a former college rower. But today he looked disheveled, his normally immaculate silver hair windblown, his Christmas sweater buttoned incorrectly. When he saw me sitting with Uncle Robert, he stopped short, emotion washing over his face in visible waves. Larry, he said, his voice breaking on my name, I am so sorry. The hotel lobby, with its half-hearted Christmas decorations and single employee trying to appear busy, was hardly the place for the conversation we needed to have. Uncle Robert suggested we move to my room, and soon the three of us were awkwardly positioned around the small space. My father and Uncle Robert sat in the 2 chairs by the window, while I perched on the edge of the bed. I need to understand what happened, I said, once we were settled. My voice came out steadier than I expected. You invited me for Christmas, right? That was real? Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Of course it was real. I have been planning for weeks, telling everyone you were coming. I even bought that special bourbon you like. Then why was there no place for me at the table? Why did Aunt Margaret say you all did not want me there? My father's face darkened. Because Margaret took it upon herself to protect what she called the family Christmas from potential disruption. She convinced your mother that having you there would create tension, that it was too soon after what happened last time. And Mom agreed with her? Just like that? Dad sighed heavily. Your mother has always been too easily influenced by Margaret. They grew up with their mother pitting them against each other, and Margaret learned early how to manipulate Catherine's insecurities. When I left to pick up Grandma from Pine Ridge, they apparently decided to take matters into their own hands by uninviting me without telling you. Yes. Which I did not discover until I returned with Grandma and asked where you were. Margaret actually looked proud when she told me what she had done. Uncle Robert, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Tell him what happened next. James. My father looked uncomfortable. I lost my temper. I have never done that at a family gathering before, but something in me just snapped. I knocked over the gravy boat, told Margaret she had absolutely no right to send you away, and said some things to Catherine I probably should not have said in front of everyone. Like what? I asked. Like how she has been letting her sister dictate our family relationships for 35 years, and I was done with it. How she had allowed Margaret to come between her and her own son. How, if anyone should leave this Christmas dinner, it was Margaret, not you. I tried to imagine this scene, my normally diplomatic father shouting at my mother and aunt in front of the extended family. It was almost impossible to picture. Then what happened? Chaos, Dad said simply. Amanda started crying. Uncle Frank tried to defend Margaret. Your cousins just stared in shock. Your mother went upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom, and I grabbed my coat and keys and went looking for you. Robert arrived just as I was leaving, assessed the situation in about 30 seconds, and offered to help find you. Uncle Robert grinned. I always did have a talent for walking into family disasters at exactly the wrong moment. The right moment, my father corrected. If you had not shown up when you did, I am not sure anyone would have talked sense into me. I was still struggling to process everything. So you really did want me there, Larry. My father's voice broke again. You are my son. Of course I wanted you there. I have missed you terribly these past 2 years. Every holiday, every family dinner, every Sunday phone call that did not happen. There has been a Larry-shaped hole in my life. The simple sincerity in his voice broke something open inside me. All the hurt and anger I had carefully packaged away came rushing back, but transformed somehow. Then why did you never stand up for me before? All those years of Aunt Margaret making snide comments, Mom treating me like I was somehow defective, Amanda following their lead. You never said anything. You would change the subject or suggest we watch the game, but you never actually stopped it. My father looked down at his hands. Because I am a coward, he said quietly. Because I convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than addressing the real issues. Because I grew up in a family where conflict was considered the greatest possible failure. Uncle Robert nodded. The Winters family motto: suffer in silence, then take it to the grave. I told myself I was protecting you by not escalating situations, Dad continued. But really, I was just avoiding difficult conversations. And you paid the price for my cowardice. He looked up, his eyes wet. I failed you, Larry. As a father, my first job was to protect you. And I did not do that. The raw honesty of his confession left me momentarily speechless. For years, I had wanted him to acknowledge exactly this. Now that he had, I was not sure how to respond. Why does Aunt Margaret hate me so much? I asked finally. What did I ever do to her? My father and Uncle Robert exchanged glances. She does not hate you specifically, my father said carefully. She resents what you represent, which is me choosing your mother over her, for one thing, Dad said. Margaret and I dated briefly in college before I met Catherine. Margaret had our entire future planned out. When I ended things, she took it hard. Then I fell in love with her sister, which made everything worse. And then you were born, Uncle Robert added. And you looked exactly like James at that age. Plus, he adored you instantly, in a way he never quite managed with Amanda. Margaret could not stand it, so she spent 35 years taking it out on me? I could not keep the bitterness from my voice. People get locked into patterns they cannot see, my father said. I am not excusing her behavior, just trying to explain it. Margaret never dealt with her feelings about our past. Instead, she channeled them into 1,000 small cruelties directed at you. And I allowed it to happen, because confronting it meant confronting my own past mistakes. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of family dysfunction hanging in the air between us. I brought presents, I said finally, and Grandma's cranberry apple casserole. They are still in my car. Something shifted in my father's expression. You made Mom's casserole? No one has made that since she died. I got the recipe from Cousin Beth. It took 3 attempts to get it right. Can I see it? The gifts too? The request seemed oddly childlike coming from my imposing father, but I nodded. Sure. They are in my car. The 3 of us trudged through the now heavily falling snow to the parking lot. I opened the trunk to reveal the bag of carefully wrapped presents, then retrieved the casserole dish from the passenger seat. My father stared at the familiar blue baking dish as if seeing a ghost. She always used this dish, he said softly. I had forgotten that. He lifted the lid, and the scent of cinnamon and cranberries wafted out. Something in his face crumpled. For a terrible moment, I thought he might cry right there in the snowy parking lot. Dad? He cleared his throat. We need to go back to the house. What? No. After what happened, I cannot just show up again. Yes, you can. Because this time, I will be walking in with you. And things are going to be different. Uncle Robert, who had been quietly watching our exchange, stepped forward. He is right, Larry. This needs to be addressed directly. Not swept under the rug, like Winter's men have been doing for generations. And I will come too. For backup. I looked between them, these two men who had taken such different approaches to family conflict. One who had stayed and tried to keep the peace. One who had left to preserve his sanity, both now suggesting the direct confrontation I had always avoided. I am not sure I am ready for another round of family drama today. It is not about being ready, my father said firmly. It is about breaking a cycle that has gone on far too long. I should have done this years ago, and that is on me. But we can start fixing it today. I hesitated, weighing the potential emotional cost against the possible benefits. Then I remembered sitting in my car outside my childhood home, watching my family celebrate without me, and felt a surge of something that was not quite anger, not quite courage, but a determination not to be erased. Okay, I said finally. But I am driving myself, so I have an escape route if needed. My father nodded. Fair enough. Robert can ride with me. We will meet you there. As I followed their car back toward the house where I grew up, I realized I was driving toward a confrontation I had been avoiding my entire life. The thought was terrifying, but also, unexpectedly, liberating. The driveway was still full when we arrived, which meant no one had left following my father's outburst. I parked on the street, my father pulling in behind me. As we approached the front door, gifts and food in hand, I felt a surreal sense of déjà vu. Just hours ago, I had stood in this exact spot, full of hope that was quickly crushed. This time, my father opened the door. The house was unnaturally quiet, given the number of people inside. As we entered the living room, I could see the entire extended family sitting awkwardly around the Christmas tree, glasses of wine or eggnog in hand, maintaining the pretense of holiday cheer, while clearly waiting for the next explosion. When they saw me standing between my father and Uncle Robert, a wave of reaction swept across their faces, from shock to discomfort to, in a few cases, what looked like relief. Aunt Margaret, seated in the place of honor near the fireplace, stood abruptly. I see you found him, she said to my father, then turned as if to leave the room. Sit down, Margaret, my father said, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority I had rarely heard him use. You are not going anywhere. To my surprise, Saturday, my mother appeared in the doorway from the dining room, her face pale. James, what is happening? What is happening is that our son is joining us for Christmas dinner as planned, Dad said firmly, and no one is going to make him feel unwelcome in his own family home. I moved past him into the center of the room and placed my bag of gifts under the tree, then walked to the dining room and set the casserole dish in the center of the table. Every eye in the house followed my movements. When I returned to the living room, I stood tall and looked around at the family that had excluded me for so long. I want to say something, I said, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. I have spent my entire life feeling like an outsider in my own family. For years, I thought it was something wrong with me, that I was somehow defective or unworthy. I went to therapy. I worked on myself. I tried to become someone you could accept. But today I realized something important. The problem was never me. Aunt Margaret made a small scoffing sound, but fell silent when my father shot her a warning look. Every family has its dynamics, its patterns that go back generations, I continued. I was assigned a role in this family long before I was old enough to understand what was happening. The disappointment, the outsider, the one who does not quite fit. And I accepted that role because I did not know I had a choice. I looked directly at Aunt Margaret now. I know about you and Dad. I know you have been punishing me my entire life for something that happened before I was born, and I am done accepting that punishment. Her face went white, then red. How dare you? You have no idea what you are talking about. Actually, he does, Uncle Robert said, stepping forward. Because I told him. The family secrets that everyone knows, but no one discusses. The patterns we keep repeating, because no one has the courage to break them. My sister Amanda, who had been silent until now, looked bewildered. What are you all talking about? What secrets? The fact that our aunt has been systematically undermining Larry's place in this family since he was born, Uncle Robert explained. The fact that Mom allowed it to happen because she was afraid of confrontation. The fact that Dad never stood up against it because he felt guilty about past history with Margaret. That is absurd, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it, Catherine? My father asked. Think about all the times Margaret made snide comments about Larry's choices, his career, his personality. How many times did you defend him? How many times did you choose your sister's perspective over your own son's feelings? My mother looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I am not here to assign blame, I said, drawing everyone's attention back to me. The past is done, but I do want to be clear about the future. I will not be scapegoated anymore. I will not accept being treated as less than, or unwelcome, or an inconvenience. If that means I cannot be part of this family, then that is a painful reality I will accept. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to everyone's surprise, my sister Amanda stood up and walked over to me. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I have watched this happen for years, and said nothing. It was easier to go along with Mom and Aunt Margaret than to risk becoming a target myself. That was cowardly, and I am sorry. I had not expected this from Amanda, the sister who had always seemed to thrive in the family dynamic that excluded me. The sincerity in her eyes caught me off guard. Thank you, I managed. One by one, other family members began to speak up. My cousin Tyler admitted he had always felt uncomfortable with how I was treated, but never knew what to say. My grandmother, who had been silently observing from her wheelchair in the corner, announced that she had always thought Margaret was too hard on the boy, and it is about time someone said so. Aunt Margaret watched this cascade of confessions with increasing anger. This is ridiculous. You are all acting as if I have been some kind of villain. I have only ever wanted what is best for this family. No, Margaret, my father said. You have wanted what is best for your vision of this family, which does not include my son as an equal member, and that stops today. She stood again, drawing herself up to her full height. Well, if that is how everyone feels, perhaps Frank and I should leave. Clearly we are not wanted here either. It was the ultimatum she had used successfully for decades. Create conflict, then threaten to leave, forcing everyone to placate her to maintain the facade of family harmony. Not this time. If that is your choice, I will not stop you, my father said calmly. But understand this. If you walk out that door now, you are choosing your pride and resentment over your family. And from now on, when we have family gatherings, Larry will be welcome, and you will treat him with respect, or you will not be included. Uncle Frank, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Margaret, perhaps we should stay and try to work through this as a family. Work through what? The fact that your brother-in-law has decided to throw away 30 years of family history over some perceived slight to his precious son? The fact that everyone is suddenly pretending I am some kind of monster when all I have ever done is try to maintain standards in this family? The fact that you sent Larry away from our door on Christmas Day, my father corrected. The fact that you took it upon yourself to uninvite my son from a family gathering in his own childhood home. That is not a perceived slight, Margaret. That is cruelty, plain and simple. She looked around the room, seeking allies, but found none. Even my mother, who had backed her sister in family conflicts for as long as I could remember, remained silent. Fine, Aunt Margaret said finally. If that is how it is going to be. Come, Frank. We are leaving. Uncle Frank looked torn, glancing between his wife and the rest of the family. Maybe we should stay and try to talk this through. Now, Frank. With a defeated sigh, he followed her to the door. As they gathered their coats, the silence in the room was heavy with decades of unspoken tensions finally brought to light. Just before leaving, Aunt Margaret turned to deliver one final barb. I hope you all enjoy your perfect family Christmas now. Just do not be surprised when history repeats itself. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. For a moment, no one spoke or moved. Then my father walked over and put his arm around my shoulders. Now, he said, with forced cheerfulness that slowly became genuine, who wants to try Larry's grandmother's famous cranberry apple casserole? I woke the next morning in my childhood bedroom, momentarily disoriented by the familiar ceiling cracks that I used to imagine were maps to undiscovered countries. It took me a few seconds to remember everything that had happened the day before. The rejection at the door, the hotel room, Uncle Robert's revelations, the confrontation, and finally, the tentative beginning of what might have been the first authentic family Christmas I had ever experienced. After Aunt Margaret and Uncle Frank's dramatic exit, the atmosphere in the house had gradually shifted. Tension gave way to awkward conversation, which eventually evolved into something approaching genuine interaction. We ate dinner, we opened the presents I had brought, we even played a few rounds of the board games that had been a Christmas tradition in happier times. It was not perfect. My mother remained reserved, clearly struggling to process her role in the family dysfunction that had been so starkly exposed. Some relatives were still uncomfortable, not sure how to relate to me now, that the family narrative had been disrupted. But it was a beginning. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and headed downstairs. To my surprise, my father was already in the kitchen, making coffee and toast. Good morning, he said, looking up with a smile that held equal parts warmth and uncertainty. Sleep okay? Better than I expected, I admitted, taking a seat at the counter. He poured me a cup of coffee and pushed it across to me. I want you to know what happened yesterday, confronting Margaret, standing up for you. That is not a one-time event. That is how things are going to be from now on. I appreciate that, Dad. I also want you to know that I understand if you need time. Trust is earned, and I have a lot of earning to do. The simple acknowledgement meant more than any grand promise could have. Thank you. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee. Then, Amanda appeared in the doorway, looking tentative. Is there room for one more in this early morning coffee club? Dad gestured to an empty stool. As Amanda settled in, I noticed dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept as well as I had. She accepted a mug of coffee from Dad and took a long sip before turning to me. I have been thinking about what you said yesterday, about being assigned a role in this family. I realized I was assigned one too, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. and I played that role because it was easier than questioning it. We all do what we need to survive family dynamics, I said. Maybe. But I want you to know I am sorry for my part in making you feel excluded, and I would like to try to build a real relationship, if you are open to that. It was the most authentic conversation Amanda and I had ever had. I would like that. Mom came down later, moving cautiously around the kitchen, as if unsure of her place in this new family configuration. Dad made her tea, speaking to her in gentle tones that suggested they had already had their own difficult conversation. She sat beside me at the counter and, after a moment of hesitation, placed her hand briefly over mine. I am not very good at this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Talking about feelings. My family never did. I know, Mom, but I want to try to do better. For you. For all of us. It was not an apology exactly, but it was perhaps the most emotionally honest thing my mother had ever said to me. I nodded, accepting it for what it was, a first small step. Uncle Robert joined us for breakfast before heading to the airport for his flight back to Seattle. As we said goodbye at the door, he hugged me tightly. You did good, kid, he said. Standing your ground without burning bridges, that is a tough balance to strike. I had good examples, I replied, including both him and my father in my glance. Different approaches, same family love, he said with a smile. Stay in touch, okay? And maybe come visit Seattle sometime. I would love to show you around. I would like that. The rest of the day passed in a strange new territory somewhere between our old family patterns and something healthier. We talked more openly than we ever had, though there were still awkward pauses and moments when old habits threatened to reassert themselves. Dad suggested we all might benefit from family therapy. And to my surprise, both Mom and Amanda agreed to consider it. As the short winter day faded into evening, I packed my car for the drive back to New York. Dad helped me carry my overnight bag and the few gifts I had received. You could stay another night, he offered. Drive back tomorrow. Thanks, but I think this is enough for now. Small steps, right? He nodded, understanding. We have a lot of work to do as a family. I know that. But I want you to know how proud I am of the man you have become, Larry. The strength and integrity you showed yesterday, standing up for yourself while still leaving room for reconciliation. That is something special, coming from my father, who had rarely expressed such direct approval. The words filled a space inside me I had not realized was empty. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. We hugged goodbye, a real embrace, rather than the perfunctory gesture that had become our norm over the years. Mom and Amanda came out to the porch to wave me off, and as I drove away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The next few months brought significant changes to our family dynamic. We began meeting with a family therapist twice a month, sometimes in person when I could drive up to Boston, sometimes via video call. It was uncomfortable at first, bringing decades of unspoken tensions into the light, but gradually we learned new ways of communicating. My father became more direct in expressing both approval and disagreement, no longer hiding behind diplomatic silence. My mother struggled the most with the new openness, but made genuine efforts to connect with me on my own terms rather than through the filter of family expectations. Amanda and I began having regular phone calls, slowly building the sibling relationship we had never quite managed to form in childhood. Aunt Margaret remained estranged, refusing all invitations to family events where I would be present. Uncle Frank occasionally came alone, walking a difficult line between loyalty to his wife and desire to maintain family connections. Some cousins followed Aunt Margaret's lead and withdrew, while others chose to engage with the evolving family dynamic. The following Christmas was dramatically different. We gathered at my apartment in New York, neutral territory that held no weight of past conflicts. The group was smaller, only my parents, Amanda and her husband, Uncle Robert flying in from Seattle, and a few close friends I considered chosen family. We created new traditions, blending old favorite recipes with new dishes that represented our expanding horizons. As we sat around my dining table, I looked at the faces of my family, both biological and chosen. The journey we had undertaken over the past year had not been easy. There had been setbacks, painful conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But there had also been genuine connection, honesty, and a growing sense that family relationships could be nourishing rather than depleting. I had learned that standing up for yourself does not necessarily mean cutting ties, that it is possible to maintain boundaries while still remaining open to healing, that some relationships can be transformed through honesty and effort, while others may need to be limited or even ended for your own well-being. Most importantly, I had learned that family is not something fixed and unchangeable, but rather a living organism that can grow and evolve when given the right conditions. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect or all wounds were healed, but because I finally understood that I had the power to define my place in my family rather than accepting the role I had been assigned. That realization was perhaps the greatest gift of all. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who consistently tried to exclude or diminish you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect in their family relationships too. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we build is just as important as the family we are born into.